What's up, mi gente? Buenos dias. Thanks for tuning in to Cafecito y Cuba. It's a pretty early episode here. It's like not even 6 a.m. But I'm up nice and early to give you the Cuban news. We've seen a lot of developments related to news with Cuba over the past 2 weeks. And so we have a lot on the agenda today. It's going to be a long, exciting, hopefully, episode. We're going to be talking about the plane crash that's killed up to 111 people now in Havana, which is pretty devastating. We're going to be talking about a development in the Venezuelan oil crisis and how it affects Cuba. I'm going to be giving my opinion on the Cuban presidential transition, and we're just going to hit on some other quick topics. But those are our main players for today. So without further ado, this plane crash. So Cubana de Aviación, the national airline of Cuba, let me just back up and give you some preface. Cuba has a very tough time. There's two big airplane manufacturers, Boeing and Airbus. Boeing manufactures planes. It's a U.S. company, and many of the planes that you fly in when you fly American or United, like you're going to fly in Boeing aircraft. Because of the embargo on Cuba, Cuba has a very difficult time getting these American planes. So oftentimes what they'll do in order to have access to these good quality, well-equipped planes is that they'll just lease them from other airlines and often other countries. So that's exactly what happened in this case. Cubana de Aviación had entered into a wet lease, and a wet lease is sort of just like a trial run agreement with a Mexican airline called Damoj. I don't know exactly how to pronounce that, but it's D-A-M-O-J, maybe H. So you guys can look that up. But they entered into this wet lease agreement with this Mexican airline, and the Mexican airline had actually had complaints before in the past. There was another airline called Easy Sky, and Easy Sky had also contracted this Mexican airline and its crew, and they had a big problem when they were on a flight back from Guyana. Guyana is an English-speaking country in South America, the only one, actually, and Cubans don't need a visa to go there, so oftentimes they'll go there and bring back basic household goods that they don't have access to in Cuba. But this Mexican crew had been just overstuffing the plane incredibly, just loading up bags everywhere, even in the bathroom of the plane, which was just like a huge red flag. Flights were canceled when that happened, and people were stranded in Guyana for a while. But maybe Cubana de Aviación should have been more aware of this. Another thing that happened was that a former Cuban pilot, he was a pilot for his entire career, he had posted on Facebook about this airline that one time they sort of disappeared on the radar in over Cuban airspace, like somewhere over central Cuba, before reappearing. But still, it was either a malfunction in technology or just a lapse in their skill set. So maybe they should have been more properly vetted. During this agreement, the maintenance and all of that was the complete responsibility of the Mexican airline and crew. So, yeah, I mean, devastating loss so far. 111 people are dead at this point, and yeah, my thoughts and prayers are out to those families. Flags are at half-mast all across Cuba as they entered 2 official days of mourning. And Inspire Cuba, my organization, is exploring options to help out these families and make an impact amid such a devastating situation. But yeah, for now, just well wishes, unfortunately. But moving on from that, talking about the Venezuelan oil crisis. So as you guys may know, people in Venezuela is a very oil-rich country, but given all the political chaos that's going on there, workers in Venezuelan refineries are leaving in droves. There's hyperinflation because a lot of basic goods and services were tied to the price of oil, which has dropped, and that's causing people to not be able to afford basic things. So they're just leaving their jobs at the oil refineries and moving on, fleeing the country if they can. And so Venezuela is actually buying foreign Russian oil to give to Cuba at a subsidized rate. So Venezuela is buying foreign oil at X amount of dollars, and they're actually losing money on giving that oil to Cuba. And Cuba doesn't even pay for this oil in cash. Cuba has historically sent medical technicians and doctors to Venezuela in exchange for this oil, but given the exchange here, Venezuela is actually going to be losing money on this, and they're actually doing this just to maintain their allies. They're dwindling since they're not being able to provide oil, which is what has kept them their remaining allies. And Cuba is one of their last ones, and they don't want to lose Cuba, so they've entered into this agreement to buy foreign oil and send it to Cuba. But things are not looking good for Venezuela and in turn Cuba. Moving on from that, so yeah, I realized I never really talked about or gave my opinion on the Cuban presidential transition, and so I thought it might be a good opportunity to do that now. But yeah, I don't really look at it as the presidential election. I look at it more as the Cuban presidential selection. This guy, Miguel Díaz-Canel, is a longtime Communist Party member. He's been involved since his youth. So, I mean, and we kind of knew it was going to be him for a long time. I mean, there was more, according to what I heard from friends in Havana, there was more buzz about the Cuban presidential transition here in the States and elsewhere than even in Cuba. I mean, in Cuba, there's just such apathy about these things that people don't get excited or get their hopes up because it's not going to make a difference in their lives at the end of the day. But my honest opinion is that I think that this is a nominal benefit. You know, I mean, when Castro died, everyone like flooded Versailles and in Miami, and you know, I was there singing Nuestro Día Ya Viene Llegando with Willie Chirino too. But you know, I never really thought that was going to lead to a huge impact or a huge dramatic change in Cuba or the way things were done there. And I share the same perspective when it comes to this presidential transition. I mean, Raúl Castro, that is still in charge of the Communist Party, which is the most powerful organization in Cuba. He's still in charge of CyC, the military conglomerate that touches every sector of the Cuban economy. So I don't expect significant change, but I do see this as a nominally good thing for Cuba. It's nominally better. I mean, it just, if anything, signifies the changing of the times. This guy is the first guy leading Cuba whose last name is not Castro. And call him a puppet, call him what you want, but you know, Raúl's not going to last forever, and this guy is going to be there going forward. And he doesn't have the moral authority that people like to call it of like liberating Cuba through the revolution, which, I mean, whether you like to acknowledge it or not, a lot of people do love and respect the Castros for that in Cuba. Obviously a lot of dissidents, you know, obviously people that are just apathetic in general, but a lot of true, like, very revolutionary spirited people in Cuba. This is not the case with this guy. This guy was born after the revolution, so he sort of has to earn his keep and be more responsive to the will of the people. At least that's my hope, you know, because what's the alternative? But yeah, so that's my opinion on that. Moving on, Las Damas de Blanco, if you don't know who Las Damas de Blanco are, there are these group of women who organize and walk in solidarity and in protest to advocate for human rights in Cuba every single Sunday after Mass at St. Rita's. And they've been doing this for many, many years. They, last week, were invited to New York to a dinner to receive the $250,000 Milton Friedman Prize for advancing human rights and advancing liberty. And so that's, I mean, the Cuban government has organized mob violence control against these poor women. This is an extremely, extremely well-deserved prize, and I'm a little bummed I didn't get to go to the dinner. But yeah, super, super happy for them. So wrapping up here, guys, as we finish the first quarter of 2018, we have some statistics in, and U.S. tourism to Cuba has dropped 60% in the first quarter of 2018. So if you guys, summer's coming up, school's out, if you guys don't have any plans this summer, travel to Cuba because they really need U.S. tourism. All right, mi gente, that's it for me. Hope you enjoyed this episode of Cafecito y Cuba. As I get more news, I'll give it to you. Take care.